my name is Lynn Betts, and I'm going to be helping host this conversation today. I want to thank you very much for choosing to spend 2 hours of your time with us this evening. One of the things I'll do in my role is keep my eye on the clock, and my commitment to you is that we will adjourn this meeting in about 2 hours. So 8 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Mountain, and for those of you who are in another time zone, 11 p.m. for some of you. I want to let you know that we are likely having folks joining from both Canada and the United States. And I want to let you know that where I'm joining the meeting from, here in the West Kootenay, just a few minutes away from the west arm of the Kootenay Lake, is on the unceded traditional and contemporary homeland of the Yakanuki First Nation. So thank you very much. I also want to let you know that this is the third in a series of listening sessions hosted by the International Joint Commission's Kootenay Lake Border Control. The other two sessions were in person last week in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and Nelson, British Columbia. And this is the third and final listening session scheduled for this fall. As we move through the conversation, though, I will let you know how you can provide input after today's discussion and during today's discussion. I also want to let you know that this meeting was advertised and promoted through the International Joint Commission's targeted mailing list, also through digital media and print media and social media as well. And I want to let you know that we will be recording the presentation portion of the discussion, but not the discussion portion of the discussion, if that makes sense. So those are just a few housekeeping notes to just situate us. Let's go on to the next slide, please. I think for some of us, we're very familiar with using Teams. Others may be less familiar. But regardless, when we go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. We are, right now, it's not possible for you to burst into the conversation. You can raise your hand and then we'll come to you and unmute you and receive your question. You could also click on the Q&A feature on the toolbar, and that's another way that you could contribute your thoughts or your ideas. So we do want to encourage your engagement in the conversation, but we are managing it for time reasons, if you will. So again, if you want to jump into the conversation, you can raise your digital hand, pop a question in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to all of those. I do want to manage your expectations, though. We're going to ask you to hold your question once my colleague Alan Thompson gets talking until the end of his presentation, but we will try to come to as many questions as we can. Let's go to the next slide, please. We will be spending, as you'll hear in a moment when I review the agenda, most of our 2 hours, we'll spend the first hour together like this, and then for about half an hour, we're going to zip you through the magic of technology into breakout groups and then come back. And during those great breakout groups, you can really have a deeper, more focused conversation around the focus of our conversation, which I'm going to elaborate on in just a moment. So just this balance of plenary and small group discussions, plus the feedback form and the email address that I'll review with you, gives you multiple opportunities to share your ideas as it relates to the Coralin Dam operations and water levels on Kootenay Lake and the Kootenay River. Let's go to the next slide, please, and thank you. So just to give you a sense of where we're going to go, good news, I'm already doing the welcome and introductions. I'm going to talk about the purpose of the meeting in a tiny bit of detail in just the next moment or two. My colleague Alan Thompson is going to make a presentation to really outline at a high level what the heck is the International Joint Commission, the Kootenay Lake Border Control, what does this talk about the Coralin Dam and the 1938 order. So you're going to get all that information, plus an overview of the process, where we are in the process now, and how your important input today will influence the plan of study going forward, pardon me. And we'll do some of that, as I say, in small groups, and then we'll have a bit of a wrap up as well. So we hope you can stay to the end, but if for any reason you have to leave and you want to provide feedback, you can Google the International Joint Commission Kootenay Lake Border Control. You can find a comment form and you can provide feedback that way if you need to go. Let's go to the next slide, please, Alan, and I'm going to introduce you now to some of the board members. So these are the board members who are really listening. We've got almost the entire board here. I know there is some issues related to flooding and water levels, no surprise, and some folks are off dealing with some of that. But that said, we've got a fantastic turnout from the board. Now, this board I'm going to introduce you to, and not only they'll be helping host some of the small group discussions today, but they're here to listen to your ideas. But their primary function is to oversee the implementation of the 1938 order on the Coralin Dam just downstream from Nelson. And that dam and how it operates really impacts water levels in Kootenay Lake and Kootenay River down into the United States. So the current dam operator is Fortis BC, and this board is overseeing the implementation of the order as implemented by Fortis. It's a long introduction. Joel, I'm going to start with you. Thank you very much for having your camera on, board members, just for the introductions. Joel is the Canadian co-chair of the board. He's works with Canada's federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada. He has extensive experience as a hydrologic modeler, working on predicting climate impacts of floods and droughts and rivers across Western Canada. So thanks for being with us here today, Joel. Let's just cross the border, if you will, and let's meet Nate Jensen. Nate works with the Kootenay tribe of Idaho. Thanks, Nate. And Nate is the U.S. Board's Indigenous member, and he has been with the Kootenay tribe of Idaho since 2015, where he's currently the director for the tribe's Fish and Wildlife Department. Thanks very much. Let's stay south of the border and meet Roger Morter. Roger is the U.S. public member on the board. Roger has been working his family's farm just south of the border in an area called the Flats for 68 years, and as I say, he's the public member on the board. His Canadian counterpart is Greg Utzig. Greg is a conservation ecologist based in Nelson with a lot of experience doing environmental impact assessment, forest management, and biodiversity protection in and around Kootenay Lake. He's a founding member of the Friends of Kootenay Lake Stewardship Society, and he's assisting with the renegotiation of the Columbia River Treaty, which is not the focus of our conversation tonight. I just want to say quickly, staying in Canada, let's meet Martin Suchi. Martin is the Canadian co-secretary. He's a senior scientist working with Canada's federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and he leads a team that's working on transboundary water issues in Western Canada. His American counterpart is Sonia Mitchelson, and Sonia is the U.S. co-secretary. She's a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers based in Seattle, Washington, and Sonia brings a lifetime of experience in reservoir operations, hydrologic analysis, and modeling. I also want to welcome Roy Bartholomew to the conversation as well. Roy is the director of the USGS Idaho Water Science Center. Roy, I understand that you've been in the role for 38 years and you're retiring in just a few days or weeks, so thank you very much for bringing all your knowledge to our conversation today. And last but not least, for our introductions, I want to introduce Connie Chapman, a Canadian member of the board. Connie is the executive director of the Water Management Branch, which with the province of British Columbia's Water Land Resource Stewardship Ministry. I'm not going to quiz you on any of those introductions, and you will have a chance to meet more of those folks when you get into your breakout groups. Let's go to the next slide now. So I've given you at a very high level what we're going to do. I've introduced you to the folks who are really going to listen hard. And now let me sharpen the focus on really what we're here to talk about. You've heard me mention a few times the Cora Lynn Dam, this 1938 order. Alan's going to go on at more length than I'm going to, but suffice it to say, the board, the folks I just introduced you to, is exploring options for revising the order that governs the rules and regulations for how the Cora Lynn Dam operates. And the board wants to understand what key social, economic, and environmental issues matter to you and the others who've been taking part in these conversations with a view, and let's go to the next slide, please, of hearing your issues and understanding what your preferences and ideas are, your experiences with water levels on both the lake and the river, depending on where you're calling in from or what your interests are. So really the conversation is going to focus in on the water levels as impacted by Cora Lynn Dam. And I want to underscore that because if you really want to talk about Duncan or Libby or the Columbia River Treaty or something else, I want to bring you back. That's not what we're going to talk about here today. So apologies in advance if that is frustrating to you. That's what we're here to talk about today. And now let's go to the next slide because I want to hand the virtual talking stick over to my colleague, Alan Thompson. Alan's going to lead the conversation. I'm going to keep my eye on the clock, make sure he stays on time. And Alan is a senior environmental consultant based in Nelson. He has many years of experience in the field of strategic planning in the water resources and engineering realms, and he's worked extensively on rivers, wetlands, floodplains, riparian areas, many lakes and watersheds around British Columbia. But for the purpose of this evening, Alan has been contracted by the Board of Control to undertake the plan of study for the order review. And in just a few moments, he's going to explain to you in more detail what is a plan of study and what is an order review. So Alan, I'm going to pass the baton over to you. I'm going to keep my eye on the clock, but if Alan is still talking when we get to 10 to the top of the hour, I'm going to give him the hook pretty soon, and then we'll be moving ourselves into the breakout groups. So I'm going to pass it over to Alan. Reminder, you won't be able to unmute and ask a question, but we will keep our eyes on the Q&A and the digital hands. Reminder, we'll let Alan get pretty close to the end of his presentation, and then we'll stop and pause. I predict you're going to have some questions about the hydrograph, and we'll take time to receive those at the end. Okay, Alan, over to you. Thank you very much. I'll let you know when you're halfway through. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lynn, and welcome all to this evening's presentation. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. I just want to underscore something that Lynn said earlier, is that this really is an evening to listen to you, to your ideas, thoughts about what's going on in Kootenay Lake, specifically around the water levels that are controlled by the Corlin Dam. So I'll be going into some detail around why the lake actually, why the water levels in the lake actually fluctuate the way they do. And then I will lead us on to trying to understand, well, what are some of the things that are important to you around those water levels and those water level fluctuations over the years. So just to give you some kind of background information as to what the IJC is and where it came from, back in 1909, there was a treaty that was signed between the United States and then Great Britain, and now Canada, of course. It was called the Boundary Waters Treaty. And it was basically a treaty that looked after or addressed issues of water that was transboundary in nature. And when you think of southern Canada and the northern United States, all along the border, there's a lot of water which passes back and forth across the border. Probably one of the better examples is the Great Lakes in central Canada, where the boundary between the two nations goes pretty much right down the middle of the Great Lakes, with the exception of Lake Michigan. And so both countries thought it was a good idea to set up some kind of treaty to understand the kind of the conflicts or the needs to discuss joint management of those waters. So out of that came the International Joint Commission. And the commission sets up orders on various watersheds along the border and comes up with orders, and then the boards of control are assigned to each one of those watersheds and those issues to address some of the topics that Lynn mentioned earlier. So here are just a very quick slide of just who the International Joint Commission is. There's basically 3 commissioners on either side of the border, 3 in Canada, 3 in the United States. And the interesting thing about the commission is that, and the works of the commission, is it's split right down the middle between the 2 nations. These are the folks that actually make the decisions about any kind of order and or a new order which would come out of this process that we're going through now. It's not the board, it's actually the commissioners. They reside in basically Ottawa and Washington, and there's also a 3rd office in Windsor, Ontario. So it's basically very quickly what the International Joint Commission does is that they actually receive applications on transboundary water issues. They work with the public very closely. It's quite a large part of their mandate is to inform the public what's going on. They undertake studies. They issue orders, much like the one that's on the Corlin Dam itself. They take recommendations, and they also appoint a board to actually monitor compliance with the IJC orders. And that was the board that you were just introduced to a little bit earlier. So just here, I'm just going to give a quick kind of overview of what the Kootenay River watershed. And it starts up here in Kootenay National Park in the Rocky Mountains, and it proceeds south and then it comes out basically into the Columbia Trench near Canal Flats, follows south down through the Columbia Trench, down kind of past Cranbrook and across the border into Montana. And here it enters into what's like, it was called Lake Kootenay. It's a reservoir which is held back by Libby Dam in this area here. Past Libby Dam, it goes past the town of Libby, past the town of Bonners Ferry, up through the Canal Flats, turning north, crosses the border just south of Creston, goes through the wetlands in that area, and basically between Creston and Bonners Ferry, it's largely agriculture on the flats there. Enters Kootenay Lake, comes up the lake, and then turns a hard left towards through Balfour, down through the West Arm, past Nelson, past Groman Narrows, through Corlin Dam, down through several different hydroelectricity generating facilities, and then down in confluences with the Columbia River down at Castlegar. So this is in the watershed. Basically, here is Kootenay Lake. So Lynn mentioned earlier, and it's really important to underscore these kind of what factors influence the water levels in Kootenay Lake. To the north, there's Duncan Dam, just highlighted here. Duncan Dam is it's a BC Hydro dam. It's also a Columbia River treaty dam. It was built and functional in the mid 60s, and it basically holds back water from the Duncan River, which comes in from the north. In the south is Libby Dam. So it's owned by and run by the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers, and it's, as mentioned earlier, it forms Lake Kootenay behind it. Both of these dams run on their own, under their own orders. They are not actually part, I shouldn't use the word order, I should say they run under their own program. They are not part of the order on the Kootenay Lake. They're not part of really the discussion we're talking about tonight. They deliver water downstream basically on their own program, and the water levels in Kootenay Lake certainly are regulated, or sorry, are influenced by them. But the Coralin Dam, order on Coralin Dam, basically has to address the water which is delivered by those two facilities. So further on, there's an important part of the understanding what's going on in Kootenay Lake is understanding something about Groman Narrows. It's a kind of a constriction in the channel, which is just south of or downstream of Nelson. It's a narrows that a lot of people in the West Arm are familiar with. And then there's Coralin Dam, of course, right here, which is owned by Fortis BC. I'll get into that in a little bit later. One part of this graphic which is not shown is basically the Kootenay Canal Plant, which is owned by BC Hydro. It was constructed in 1967, and essentially it's a facility which bypasses for the older hydroelectricity generating stations on the Kootenay River, and it's owned by BC Hydro. And the intake for that plant is basically in the forebay of the Coralin Dam. They share that. So why is the IJC involved in the Kootenay River? Essentially, what happens is that the boundary water treaties, it addresses transboundary influences of water. So when the Coralin Dam was built, it actually backflooded water into the state of Idaho. And so that's where the IJC comes in. So that's why the boundary water treaty applies. So a little bit history behind the Coralin Dam. In 1929, the West Kootenay Power and Light Company, they sought approval to actually build a dam in the present location of Coralin, and they wanted to store 6 feet of water in the lake. There was some concern from the agriculture community in Idaho that the water would back up into Idaho and affect the agricultural productivity in that section of water, and so they did not want to have the dam approved. So the West Kootenay Power and Light Company, they actually went ahead and built the dam anyway, and it was finished in 1932, but they ran it in such a way that it did not back water into Idaho. And they were waiting for the IJC to kind of come to some kind of resolution about whether they could store water in the Kootenay Lake. So there was some negotiating back and forth, and the U.S. opposition was dropped when there was some compensation which was provided to the agriculture community in Idaho because of the additional water which is stored in the lake. And so then in 1938, the issue was ordered to Coralin Dam, and basically the order has not changed at all since 1938, and hence the review. That's why there's a review, order review up now. There's a number of boards across a number of orders, I should say, across the country have been asked to review the orders, and the order on the Coralin Dam is one of them. So I'm just going to go through what the order basically included, and it's fairly straightforward. It includes basically 4 things. It included the requirement that Fortis BC, or sorry, I should say West Kootenay Power and Light, they actually dredged Groman Narrows, and they wanted to basically deepen it. And so they took out a lot of material out of Groman Narrows and deposited it on the shore. The second one is that because of that dredging, that they were supposed to operate Coralin to actually lower peak water levels in Kootenay Lake. peak levels that were occurring during the spring and the summer and during the spring freshet, and flooding out a lot of properties. And then the third part was to pay Idaho farmers to help offset increased pumping costs because of the higher water levels. And then, of course, the last one was to specify the maximum Kootenay Lake water levels. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So here's the main provision with number one. Here's a great picture of a dredge in Groma Narrows taken in 1939. And if you look across here, you'll see where my pointer is. You'll see the line here. That's actually the railway that goes across there. It's a present railway alignment. And down here, that's the island, which is actually in the middle of Groma Narrows. If you've ever boated down there or recreated down there, you'll recognize that. And the current highway is up through here. It wasn't built at that point, but that's where it is there. So basically, they were supposed to, West Kootenay Power and Light was directed to actually dredge the Narrows, and they did so in the 1940s. And then, of course, the second part of the order was to make sure that the dredging was allowed for the lowering of peak water levels in Kootenay Lake. And then it allowed Fortis basically to store water for power generation, and then to minimize the amount of the impacts on the agriculture community down in Idaho. So here's a graphic which shows kind of how Groma Narrows and the Coralin Dam interrelate. So there's an interesting kind of feature and aspect of this whole order is that there's a dance that goes on between the Coralin Dam and the Groma Narrows. As I mentioned before, Groma Narrows is a constriction, a hydraulic constriction. So it limits the amount of water which it actually can drain out of Kootenay Lake. And so when the water level is high, let's get my pointer here, when the water level is high in front of Coralin Dam, it kind of washes out the Narrows here and pushes water back up into the lake. When water levels are lower in front of the dam, like this place, the actual constriction of what's keeping water in Kootenay Lake is Groma Narrows. And so control of the water levels in Kootenay Lake goes back and forth between Coralin Dam and Groma Narrows, and so it goes back and forth. And this is an interesting part of this whole order is that Coralin Dam is basically run to store water in the lake when they're allowed to, but when it's supposed, when water levels are high, we need to drain the lake quickly in terms of during periods of freshet. Water levels in front of Coralin Dam are low, and then Groma Narrows actually becomes a constriction, defines basically what the water levels are in Kootenay Lake. Now I'm going to use a graphic in the next slide here. This is the hydrograph that Lynn mentioned earlier, and I'm going to stay on this for just a few minutes to explain this, because this, in a nutshell, is why water levels are the way they are in Kootenay Lake over a year. So I've chosen a hydrograph of the year 2014. I could have chosen pretty much any year. They're very similar in their features, but this is 2014, and so it's a year long from January here all the way through to December. And then we have the elevation of the water level in Kootenay Lake. This is up in, as measured in Queens Bay. And it's kind of, the water level in the lake kind of goes between 1740 and about 1750, 1755 on a normal year. These are in feet. And so the green line here in 2014, this is the water level that was in the lake. It's kind of started around 1743, and then it drops in the winter, and in the early spring, it's dropping down. And then on comes freshet. A lot of snow starts to melt. The Kootenay Lake starts to fill up with just snowmelt water, and the water levels rise. They go up and they hit a peak somewhere in kind of end of May, early June, sometimes in July, depending on the state of the snowpack and whether there's a warm weather and there's a lot of rain or what have you. But anyway, in this particular year, it kind of peaked at around end of May, and then it slowly drops down this way, and it comes down, and then it kind of fluctuated here all the way through. This gray band that you see here, this is kind of the range of water levels in the lake between 1984 and 2021. And you can see here that I marked it here in July 2012, this was the peak water level in the lake at that time. And if you were around on the lake in that month in that year, you'll remember that there was some concern about flooding in the in the Kootenay Lake and in the West Arm. Anyway, so this red line is what is called the rule curve. It's the order that prescribes to Fortis the maximum level in water level in Kootenay Lake that can be had in any particular time of the year. So it starts here at about 1745, and the order contains instruction to gradually lower the water level at this period of time. And the reason they're doing this is because they're anticipating the freshets coming, and so they want to be able to have room in the lake to store that water, because Groma Narrows does restrict the outflow of water, and so they want to basically provide enough room in the water, enough volume in the lake to actually absorb the floodwaters. And so at this point, the IJC and the board declares that spring freshet is on the rise, and so the rule curve pops up. And this section of the rule curve, I'm just kind of dragging my pointer over. This section of the rule curve changes every year, and it's dependent upon current conditions. It's also dependent upon the flow rate that was through the Narrows pre-dredging. It's kind of a formula, and it changes every year, but essentially it's above the lake level is really what it comes down to. And then at some point, the water start to fall, and water comes out. Now, this section of the graph here is straight, and it's quite low. And this part of the order was put in place to make sure that water levels in the lake were low enough that they wouldn't flood out the fields in basically south of the border in Idaho. This is kind of this right in August. It allows the farmers there to basically harvest their crops and such that they wouldn't be suffering from water damage. Come September 1, though, the curve pops up, and then for that point on, Fortis is able to basically put water into the lake from basically September 1 all the way through to the following January 7th. And if you've heard of the Fortis being able to store 6 feet of water in the lake, here it is. It's basically the difference between this minimum elevation here, which is 1739.32 feet, and the maximum is 1745.32 feet, and the difference between those two is 6 feet of water. So that's where that comes from. So I was mentioning earlier before the importance of Groma Narrows and how Corps Lynn and Groma Narrows kind of do this dance back and forth about who or what is controlling the water levels in Kootenay Lake. And this figure down here shows that dance. And so at this period of time, in the green, Corps Lynn is actually controlling the water levels in Kootenay Lake. But at this point, when the water levels are right around here, the control switches from Corps Lynn to Groma Narrows. And all the way through this period here, all the way up through here, it's Groma Narrows, which is actually in control. So no matter really what Fortis does to Corps Lynn Dam, when they draw it right down in this period, so the water in front of the dam is very low. But no matter what they do, Groma Narrows is still in control of the water levels. And then at some point around here, Corps Lynn comes back in control, and then they are controlling it all the way through here. So some of you might have noticed that in this section here, well, the water level in Kootenay Lake is actually above the rule curve, and so is Fortis out of compliance. And there is exceedance here, but no, Fortis is actually still in compliance with the order, simply because they've done everything they can to actually lower water levels in Kootenay Lake. And it is, part B, is it in this section here, where the dam is in what's called free fall situation, where all the gates are open or open enough, and it is Groma Narrows which is in control of the water levels. So very last, these are some of the elevations which are indicative of floods. And right around this elevation, these are kind of, I would say, general elevations, but it kind of indicates that at right around this point, minor flooding begins, and there's kind of a small financial impact. And as the flood waters get higher and higher, the impact gets greater. So just want to make a plug for this graphic was actually taken from the board's visualization tool. So if you go onto their website, you'll see this a great graphic. It's an interactive graphic which shows very nicely the interaction between Groma Narrows and coralline throughout a year under different conditions, under a wet year, a normal year, which is this year, and a dry year.
Alan, I just want to let you know you've got 15 minutes more to present, and that'll still give us 10 minutes for questions, FYI.
Excellent. Thank you, Lynn. So here's basically the last kind of provision on the order, and that is to help out with the Idaho farmers with the increased pumping costs. So when water's backed up into Idaho, and this section of Kootenay River is diked, and usually the water is actually above the farmers' fields, and so water seeps under the dikes, and farmers actually have to pump out the waters from their fields and from their drainage canals, and that of course incurs costs. And so the order actually gave at the time in 1938 instructed the West Kootenay Power and Light to send annually $3,000 down to Idaho to be shared amongst the farmers there to pay for pumping costs. And there was no provision for inflation or increases, and that so basically it's still in the order. They're supposed to give the farmers $3,000 a year. Currently now that's a negotiated settlement between Fortis and the agricultural community, and it's more like $30,000 in today's dollars. However, the order, arguably, a lot of people said the order should be updated to include, a more kind of acknowledgement of pumping costs and maintenance costs and things of that nature, basically getting the water out of their fields. So just wanted to kind of wrap up here, just to get back to what we're talking about tonight. So just wanted to focus in that this is the actual order review focus. It basically goes from Bonners Ferry, where the backwater effect I was just mentioning, that's about as far upstream as it goes. And it basically includes all of Kootenay Lake, does not go up past Duncan, and through the West Arm down to the Coralline Dam. So this endeavor that the board has embarked upon, kind of the order review, it basically has three phases. The first phase is what we're in. So we're kind of in the early stages of this process, and we're in the plan of study phase, and that will occur over the next year. So the plan of study phase is basically collecting information about what are the issues that are important to the public and entities that are around Kootenay Lake and up into Bonners Ferry. What are the issues that are important to them around water levels and the water levels that are controlled by Coralline Dam? And out of that conversation will come indications of what's important, and then the question will be asked, well, what do we know about those issues which are important? And if we know a lot about those issues, great. If we don't know enough about those issues, what can we do? What studies can we commission and complete that will fill out our knowledge of what that issue is all about? And I'll tell you an example. So wetlands. Some wetlands there are large wetlands on both ends of Kootenay Lake. How much do we know about those wetlands, and how would they be affected if we had a change in the order that changed water levels or the regime of water levels? What do we know about those wetlands? And if we don't know enough, then what studies do we need to do in order to understand them further or in a more fulsome way? And so the second phase is that those studies will be done. And then the third phase was that ideally the board will then have a full basket of information about all the different issues that are affected by water levels in Kootenay Lake, and they will be able to make a recommendation recommendation about a new order, what the terms of that new order would be, and they would send that recommendation to the commissioners in Washington and Ottawa, and those are the folks that would actually take the recommendation from the board and come up with a new order. So the order could be quite different from what it is now. Might be a few small changes, or possibly there will be no change at all. We don't know. But this is what this process is about, is to try to figure out what that new order should be, if it should change or not. So again, quickly, the plan of study is about seeking public feedback, identifying the issues, and then proposing the studies. So the board really wants to hear from you. It's a big part of this, of my job here, is to get feedback from all sorts of parties, entities, and the public. We want to know basically what are some of the social and the environmental and the economic issues that the board should consider when we're considering revising the order rules and the criteria that are governing Kootenay Lake water levels. And I'm just going to throw out some ideas for you. The board is aware of some of the issues. These lists I'm about to show you, the next few slides, by no means are they comprehensive, and this is where you come in to fill these out and to add some more. So we're going to be all ears just in a few minutes when I finish it off here. But some of the social issues that the board is aware of is, flood risk around the lake, access to waterfront amenities, beaches, boat launches, things of that nature. The impact on fishing opportunities in the lake, erosion of waterfront property. A lot of people are concerned about that. Some environmental issues that we're aware of is that the shore spawning kokanee stranding and egg dewatering. This is quite a concern, a bit kind of specifically in the West Arm here about shore spawning kokanee. What about the lake regulation, the effects on the fishery and the ecological requirements of the many species that inhabit the lake? Some people are concerned about the meteorological and hydrologic changes due to the increased vulnerability to climate and climate change issues. As I mentioned before, there are several wetlands around the lakes. What would be the impact on those particular features? And then, of course, some economic issues. It's like, well, of course, at the end of the day, is generating electricity from this water. And so if there was a change in the water regime, the water levels, or just throughout the year, what would that mean to their facility? And then, of course, there are other facilities further on down the river which would be impacted by that. What would be the changes there? Well, how about the farmers in Idaho? Should they be reimbursed more for their pumping costs? What about their dikes and levees that they would have to maintain? Should there be some consideration there? Dredging options. Kootenay, of course, was dredged. It wasn't dredged once. It's been dredged several times. But do there need to be more dredging considerations and options? So the question for you folks to consider in the next section of this meeting is, what about, for water levels, like what do changing water levels? What impact do they have on you, on your community, on the environment that you're aware of? And then what advice would you actually give to the board about water levels and what's important to you? So at this point, I'll just go on to this last slide here, and then I'll hand it off to Lynn. So your comments are going to be very helpful in shaping what issues are studied and considered in the near future. After this meeting is over, I'm going to be starting, and the board, we're going to be starting to have meetings with all levels of government, First Nations and tribes, and the utilities and conservation groups. And I'll be working on this project over the winter, and then a draft report will be available for public review and comments in the upcoming spring. So with that, I'll hand it off to Lynn.
Great. Thanks very much, Alan. You're ahead of schedule, so I totally love that. Thanks very much. So if you read the first thing on this slide, don't put anything on a sticky note and try to mount it on your computer monitor or do anything like that. But there are multiple ways you can provide feedback. One of the ways is stick with us. We're going to open up the question and answer session for a little while so you can get clarifying questions. And we've got some questions already queued up for you here, Alan. But there is an email address right below the heading called After Meeting Kootenay Lake Plan of Study at gmail.com. alan@kootenaymd.com. That email will go right to Alan. So if there's something more you want to know, or if something isn't obvious to your colleagues who aren't here after they review the slides or watch the video, which will be available later on this week on the IJC website, you can reach out to Alan. There's also a comment form. So if you go to the URL there, ijc.org/en/KLBC, and if you scroll down to the contact form, so don't look for something that says Kootenay Lake feedback form, just scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see contact. I believe it's a yellow button, and just fill out the form with your suggestions, ideas, questions, or information needs related to this conversation specific to the Coral Inn Dam and water levels on the Kootenay Lake and Kootenay River.